Hello and welcome to heliosblog. My name is Helios, here for another reaction video. Today, Jordan Peterson destroys woke liberals. Let's get into it.
The reason she's alone is because she's difficult.
Women are not accepting the bare minimum.
Women fuck men they respect.
All the women who say things like, I'm strong, independent, I don't need no man, like, y'all impress me.
Women just gaslight each other and say what they want to hear.
Why is society overly feminized?
Well, I didn't ever say that society was overly feminized. So if we're going to discuss my views, we should use my actual word.
Yeah, so what is that? It's a logical fallacy. Yeah, straw man. It's a straw man argument. Misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack.
What is the purpose precisely?
I am quoting things that you said.
Why? What is it that you're trying to establish?
Because you said them.
I thought we were talking about masculinity.
We are.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
How are we talking about masculinity?
Because I'm asking you what you think of men and of women.
Basically what you've been trying to do, I would say for the last 15 minutes, is put me into a sequence of corners by accusing me of various forms of misbehavior. So why are we doing that? What's the point here?
These are things that you said.
So basically, they are loaded questions. They're questions that are asked, and these questions have a presumption built into there so that they can't be answered without appearing guilty.
My job as a journalist is to ask questions about what you represent and the ideas that you defend.
Right, but your bent on journalism is to try to destroy the reputation of the person who you're supposedly asking questions. You're not neutral, you're serving an underlying agenda.
Your job is also to select the things that you might ask about in some manner that doesn't indicate a substantive bias.
Indeed, exactly.
You picked 3 things to talk to me about in the last 20 minutes that were very carefully selected. Like, why did you pick those things?
Because this is my job.
Yeah, exactly. That describes it perfectly. It is my job to destroy you. That was what was unsaid.
Should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive.
Yeah, exactly. So people like feeling bad about something is like, okay, so what? We should all walk around society walking on eggshells, afraid to say any little thing that might offend somebody for risk of being batoned? Do you see what I'm saying? That puts a strangle on speech and thought. It's like the book 1984.
I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like, you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me.
Right. So why should a certain group of people be allowed to be offended and not a certain other group of people? Exactly. That's right. And that hits at an underlying issue that's very bad, which is that no matter what, some group is going to be marginalized, right? And they're just moving the goalposts of who should be marginalized. But ultimately, the ability to speak freely, to say what you actually want to say, is extremely important. And the reason it's important is because this is what allows creative new ideas to appear. If certain thoughts aren't allowed to be had, and the punishment for having those thoughts is being police batoned, then or being thrown in a metal box, it's a huge problem, and it's a huge problem that degenerates society. All right, shitting time. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all for notifications. Drop me a donation like Hunter M, Adrian R, Tom M, and Bobby. Shoutouts to him, new joiner of Patreon. Thanks a lot. Also, buy my books at bit.ly/heliosbooks. Shoutouts to Curry Kid, most recent purchaser of The Strategist's Guide to Seduction. Thank you. I really do appreciate it. All right. My Patreon is patreon.com/theheliosblog. If you want to support me on the podcast, just click more in the link in the description. Scroll down, it says support the show there. There's a Buzzsprout link. All right. Share this video as well. Okay, shitting is done. Let's continue.
And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
So you haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
so it's who was it that said it? I disagree with what you're saying, but I'll fight to the death your right to say it. One sec, I'll look up the quote. Sorry, I'm holding a mic, so I'm only typing with one hand. Okay, I'm finding it right now. Voltaire. Okay. Voltaire was the pen name of some lady who died in 1778. I disapprove of what you say, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And it depicted Voltaire's internal mental attitude. There you go. So not an actual quote, but a historical idea, I guess.
Ha, gotcha.
you have got me. You have got me.
Uh-oh.
Maybe you just think that women should be equally represented in the decision-making fora of our nation. Maybe that's really just about having proper equality in a body that's meant to be representative.
Well, I do believe that women should have... I don't understand your question, I guess.
I guess you don't. That's pretty obvious, unfortunately.
Well, how about if you phrase it more clearly, instead of just insulting me?
Yeah, that's called an ad hominem.
Look at it this way. Let's talk about quotas for a minute. So there's a very wide array of jobs that are fundamentally done by men. So, for example,
Member of Parliament,
99.9% of
sorry, Alex, I'm going to
bricklayers.
stop sledging you now, I promise.
I'm happy to give my minute to Jordan.
99.9% of bricklayers are men. Should we have quotas for women?
Is bricklaying representative democracy?
That has nothing to do with the question. The question
So that's moving the goalposts.
is if there's evidence of structural inequality and oppression because women aren't precisely represented at 50% in all professions at all levels, then why don't we have a conversation about having women represented in all professions at all levels?
Right, exactly. Only at the highest levels should women be 50% represented. At the lower levels, no, you men can take those. That is fundamentally unequal, right?
Why do we talk about the C-suite, for example? Why do we talk about politics and positions of power? Why don't we talk about it across the board?
Okay, indeed.
Well, that's my idea of the patriarchy, which is a system of male dominance of society.
Yeah, but that's not my sense of the patriarchy.
So what's yours?
Well, in what sense is our society male-dominated?
The fact that the vast majority of wealth is owned by men, the vast majority of capital is owned by men. Women do more unpaid labour.
A very tiny proportion of men, and a huge proportion of people who are seriously disaffected are men.
Right, exactly. So you're, what is this called? Using a small percentage to generalize to the population is anecdotal. Using personal experience or an isolated example, especially to dismiss statistics. It could also be, no, not that. Oh, a Texas sharpshooter, cherry-picking data clusters to suit an argument. So because a very small percentage of men own all the wealth, therefore men are oppressing society. Well, no, because if you look at men as a whole averaged out, that isn't the case.
Most people in prison are men. Most people who are on the street are men. Most victims of violent crime are men. Most people who commit suicide are men. Most people who die in wars are men. People who do worse in school are men. It's like, where's the dominance here precisely?
Yeah, actually, in 2023, women are favored in practically all areas, right? You can get a job easier than a man. You can get better education than a man. You're more likely to go to university than a man. You're more likely to get paid 6 figures than a man. You're should anything go bad, there are support systems and nets in place for you as a woman that don't exist for men, and so on. So that's right. So the underlying idea is that women are actually favored and not men in modern Western society.
What you're doing is you're taking a tiny substrata of hyper successful men and using that to represent the entire structure of Western society. There's nothing about that that's vaguely appropriate.
But I could say equally well that most rape victims are women. Terrible things happen to people of both sexes.
And you could say that with perfect utility, but that doesn't provide any evidence for the existence of a male-dominated patriarchy.
Well, there are...
Right, exactly, because that is one bad thing that happens to women, and there are bad things that happen to men as well. So, exactly.
Just means that terrible things happen to both genders,
That's right.
Which they certainly do.
But there are almost no women who rape men.
Sure, but again, if we're thinking about bad things that happen to men and women, bad things happen just in different arenas, right? So, whereas you could say that's possibly the most horrible thing that could happen to a woman, true, and it happens mostly to women. And how about getting shot and killed? That's pretty horrible. That happens mostly to men. You see? Would you say that losing your, like, yes, it's horrible that it happens to women, of course. But there are horrible things that happen to men as well. And again, it doesn't, what you're saying doesn't mean that society is therefore ruled by men. One premise doesn't actually lead to the other.
For example, so that is an asymmetry there in sexual violence.
Sure, but there's an asymmetry in actual violence as well.
Well, yes, there's an asymmetry in all sorts of places, but that doesn't mean that Western culture is a male-dominated patriarchy. The fact that there are asymmetries has nothing to do with your basic argument.
Indeed.
I want to know. So,
okay, that's a defeatist attitude, first of all. But ultimately, the solution for you is to be a traditional woman and get a man to take care of you. That's the traditional. That's what should be done, and it should be done en masse. The solution to most of these things is stop being strong, independent women. Assume your traditional role like you're supposed to. Get with a strong man, and the man will solve your problems. And if he doesn't solve your problems, well, then he's not a strong man, which is circular logic. But anyway, let's continue.
what is your advice beyond banal comments like clean your room?
Haha, so funny, so great. Indeed, exactly. They're not out of your control. So you need to individually be the change that you want to see in the world. So if you want, for example, the economic crisis to be solved on your individual level, then rather than think about it as this giant thing hovering over your head, you should think about, what can I do to be protected? Well, what you can do to be protected is be fit, feminine, submissive, cooperative, bedroom fun, loyal. You can be those. And when you are those, then a man will come and take you, a man who is successful and who is confident and who is strong and who is able to protect you from the things, right? From this economic crisis. And then you wouldn't ever complain about it, right? And so on.
What is your answer?
Do you think that you're worse off than you think that you're worse off than your grandparents?
I think there are different challenges.
Do you think you're worse off tan your grandparents?
Answering a question with a question is another ad hominem. It's no. Where is it? Yeah. Avoiding having to engage with criticism by turning it back on the accuser, answering criticism with criticism. Tu quoque.
Jordan, once again, we're not going to cross-examine our questioners.
Fundamentally, I'm a psychologist, and my experience has been that people can do a tremendous amount of good for themselves and for the people who are immediately around them by looking to their own inadequacies and their own flaws and the things that they're not doing in their lives.
Indeed. So it's personal responsibility. Are you fit, feminine, cooperative, submissive, and bedroom fun loyal? In fact, I can tell from this set of questions that you have asked me that well, I can tell visually you're not fit, you're not submissive, you're not cooperative. Basically, you're none of the things that women need to be to have a successful life, and you're wondering why your life is going badly. Where is your mother? Where is your grandmother? Where's your father to tell you how you're supposed to be? They're gone. And you won't listen to me. So now what? No, it's exactly right. It's, if you're in a glass house, don't throw stones.
Which happens in many ways.
And she disagrees, right? She disagrees with, you need to fix your own problems before accusing me of not doing anything.
Why do you feel that someone's personal gender identity and pronouns infringes your free speech? Can one not also argue, based on your interpretation, that professors can use racial slurs in their classroom and that the inability to do so would violate their freedom of speech?
There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest.
Indeed. So, actually, very nice argument. It's not... There's a difference between you can't say that and you must say this. Right. Exactly. Forced speech is what he's describing.
We had that series of statements from you. Speaking clearly is one of your 12 rules. And I wonder why it is that in a situation like that and in many other situations, what actually happens is that you sow confusion.
I don't sow confusion.
I disagree. I don't think he sows confusion at all. That is called a straw man argument. Misrepresenting someone's argument to make it easier to attack. He doesn't sow confusion. It also could be an ad hominem. You're not a clear speaker. It's an attack on his character.
The journalists that interview me sow confusion.
Well,
the woman who wrote
why
the
do
New
you
York
think
Times
that happens?
article.
That
for
you
her,
get misinterpreted in your views so often?
With her, it was absolutely clear.
There is an underlying aim. There's an underlying bent to the questions that these journalists ask. The bent is, I'm trying to get you to burn yourself so that we can clip you and plaster your name everywhere and destroy your reputation.
Spent 2 days with her, and we spent 30 seconds talking about enforced monogamy, and she's a very smart woman, and she knew exactly what I meant and chose to make that the centerpiece of the article for I would say, to attract attention in a way that was completely inappropriate.
But you know, it's not just the journalists from the New York Times. You know that this happens over and over and over.
That's because the journalists read each other's journalism.
That's right.
And they don't read the books, and they don't watch what I'm saying.
Never with you. The fault is...
Well, no, the fault is some...
Come on. Yeah. So, again, like what? So you look like someone's father, and you're like rude and disrespectful, but in a nice tone. Okay, yeah. In most places in the world, them's fighting words. You're being very disrespectful. Yeah, it's right. So what you're saying is, I never accept responsibility for my own statements. It's always other people's fault. Well, when other people are trying to paint me into a corner and make me look out to be this boogeyman, when what I'm trying to do is actually protect people, it's ridiculous.
Sometimes with me, I mean, it's not like I always say everything perfectly, but there's no, it's getting dull to read the journalistic accounts because they're just mirror images of everything that's been written over the last year and a half, and the same old things. There's 10 epithets that are generally thrown at me, every one that you can possibly think of.
M word, A word, R word.
and people have gone over everything I've said to my students for the last 30 years, almost all of which is recorded, and found absolutely no evidence for any of that, even once.
I would say that there is a lot online of journalists actually trying to interview seriously, trying to get to...
No, that's not what they're doing. If you actually look at the way that the questions are asked and what is underlying, what is underneath those questions, it's utterly ridiculous to say that they're asked in good faith a lot of the time.
Towards a proper understanding, and that what you just said to me is a very common thing you say. I've been over the evidence. There is no evidence anywhere.
It isn't just me that's been over the evidence. It's people that have been trying to take me out who've been over the evidence and have not been able to find any. I do stand by my original statement, though, that there's a brand of more radical feminism that insists that our culture is best characterized as an oppressive patriarchy, and I think that, first of all, that's an appalling sociological doctrine, and I think it has very negative psychological effects.
Yep.
And they won't be limited to men, because if it's true that there's something toxic, let's say, about masculinity per se, what that will inevitably mean is that as women adopt more masculine roles, traditionally, what is that toxicity somehow going to go away?
But that's a straw man, because no one says there's anything toxic about masculinity per se.
What do you mean no one says that?
People
The term exists.
No.
How is that a straw man?
Well,
but where did the term come
It's a
from?
phrase that's used about forms of masculinity that are harmful to men and women. It's not about masculinity per se. You must know.
What? Then, no. That actually is a straw man. Very interesting that the person is accusing somebody of a straw man by calling their argument a straw man when it's not actually a straw man. The accusation is a strong man. But yeah, very interesting.
I read the American Psychological Association guidelines for the treatment of boys and men, and I know perfectly well that this is no straw man.
Why do you think it is that so much of what you say is so very popular with the alt-right?
It isn't, and you don't have any evidence for that at all. More than the evidence.
Indeed, it's just what's it called? Asking questions in bad faith.
That alt-right people
Daily
watch this
Stormer,
show.
neo-Nazi website, Saviour of Western Civilization.
Oh well, that was all taken apart today by a number of Jewish publications, by the way, showing that, first of all, that was all satirical commentary on the part of the alt-right, directed at taking me down, for example. And there was an alt-right article yesterday published saying that I was a Jewish stooge and shill. So this is absolute nonsense, and I don't appeal primarily to the alt-right. There's no evidence for that at all.
That's right.
It's the proclivity of...
I never said primarily, Jordan. What I'm interested in is why you think that you get the reaction that you do from the alt-right. Looking at the Cathy Newman documentary.
What reaction?
Interview.
There's 10 million people watched that and commented on it.
I'm talking about what I saw, and I'm curious to know what your reaction was to the glee with which the alt-right seized upon that interview.
I don't accept
Should we deal with the death threats? I mean, she had, I think, a dozen
I don't accept
death
the concept that it was the alt-right that was doing this. There were 10 million people who commented on that video, and about 95% of them commented negatively on Cathy Newman's behavior. You think there's 10 million alt-right trolls watching that?
A trans woman is a real woman.
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. Now, I don't know what that means. What do you mean, a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and
so making a biological argument.
Studies, and I'm really also very much interested in studies like the analysis that was done by the American Psychological Society, which looked at 45 analysis of whether there's sex difference over 20 years, and its conclusion was that men and women are basically alike in terms of personality, in terms of cognitive ability, in terms of leadership. But what it did find was that media depictions of men and women
I doubt this study very strongly, and I would like to read where they got their data from, because that does not support a biological reality at all. And in fact, anybody with two eyes that can see, like, look, the girl here who is the host or whatever, the person asking questions, look at how she's dressed versus how a man's dressed. Look at her hair versus a man's hair. Look at her style versus a man's style. And tell me that men and women are basically similar. They're not. And it's so clear and obvious that anybody can see that.
It's fundamentally different. Perpetuate misconceptions, as does workplace.
Men and women actually are more the same than they are different. But the issue is that small differences at the population level can turn into very large differences at the extreme. So, for example, men and women are broadly similar with regards to aggression, although men tilt a little bit more towards aggression. So that if you picked a random person out of the population, male and female, and you guessed that the male was more aggressive, you'd be right 60% of the time. But if you take the 1 in 100 most aggressive people, they're all male. And that's why the overwhelming proportion of people who are in prisons are male. Now, do you want to equalize that? Just out of curiosity? What about bricklayers? They're 99% male. And we've got about 3/4 of the population now in universities in the humanities and social sciences are female.
Yeah.
Are we going to equalize that?
Right, so only equalize in favor of women. We've heard this argument before. And, okay, sure, we can make the argument that men and women are similar in that their DNA is similar, but there are many, many, many traits in which they're different and fundamentally different, and so fundamentally different that they appear to be different species, right? So I disagree. I would like to look at this that study specifically. All right, we're going to end the video there. Hit the like, hit the sub, hit all for notifications. Drop me a donation like Hunter M, Agent Tomum, and Bobby. Shout outs to him, being the newest supporter on Patreon. Thank you so much. Buy my books at bit.ly/heliosbooks. Shout outs to Curry Kid, being the most recent purchaser of Strategist Guide to Seduction. Thank you, I really appreciate it. And, of course, my Patreon is patreon.com/theheliosblog. If you want to support me on the podcast, just click the description on the podcast, the description box. Scroll down to support the show, and you see a Buzzsprout link there. All right. Thank you so much for listening, especially if you listen to the end. Share this video. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.